So good evening, everyone. Tonight we are going to be bouncing around a bit because what we're going to be talking about is the idea of presenting monotheism within a polytheistic world. How that comes through both in Tanakh, and we're going to look at what we know about what polytheism was in that area. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the Ugaritic text I sent you. We're going to be looking a little bit at the Mesha stele if we get to it. I'm not sure how much in depth we're going to go because that's going to come up a little bit when we talk about Yiftach, right? But so let's start now. I do want to say, because we just read a parsha where we had the whole story. We had the whole story with Hagar and Ishmael, and there's a lot of things in there that probably reflect Near Eastern common law, at least what we know of it from the Hammurabi Code. But I'm going to have a whole class on the Hammurabi Code and how we can interpret it. I want to remind you that when we talk about a law code in the ancient Near East, it didn't work like we think of law books working today. No one ruled from the Hammurabi law code. The Hammurabi law code was meant to show how smart Hammurabi was, and it itself was based on apparently going common law. So, but sometimes we do see interesting similarities between what the Hammurabi code talks about and things like Hagar. So for example, I'll just give you a quick example. So in the Hammurabi code, you have, if a man takes a wife and this woman gives her husband a maidservant and she bears him children, but this man wishes to take another wife, he can't, right? But if the man takes, and then it says if a man takes a wife and she gives this man a maidservant as a wife, and she bears him children, and then this maid assumes equality with the wife, because she has borne him children, her master shall not sell her for money, but he may keep her as a slave, reckoning her among the maidservants. And we have this, when it says that Hagar gets uppity when she's pregnant, it's clearly like she's saying, well, now I've got kids, I'm gonna get pregnant now, he can't sell me. It says if she doesn't bear kids, she can be sold. It's like, well, now I'm gonna have kids, he can't sell me. But common law apparently says, no, but she can be a slave, right? And you see that kind of at work in our story with Hagar, also in terms of sending away Ishmael during the lifetime of Abraham. In the Code of Hammurabi, it doesn't exactly work that way, but if someone wants to inherit alongside the other children, the father has to acknowledge them. If he has children with, like, the children of a maidservant, he has children with a maidservant, he has to acknowledge them in his lifetime as his children for them then to inherit. By sending them away, it seems like that's what's been going on with Abraham, is that he's sending Ishmael away during his lifetime. He is thus cutting him off in a way from the inheritance. The same thing he does with the children of Keturah, right, later on. That's because biblically what we're supposed to understand from that is the only true heir of Abraham is Yitzchak, right? Yes, Ishmael has a future. Yes, the children of Keturah have a future. But the only true heir is Yitzchak, and that's why Abraham sends him away. But there, anyway, so you can understand a lot more sometimes about what's going on biblically when you look at the context of kind of common law and common understanding. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to look at the common understanding of polytheism. I'm going to start with some verses which may be talking about that and may not be talking about that, and then we're going to use that as a jumping off board to our Ugaritic text. Okay, so I am now going to read to you from I'm going to read to you now from Parashat Lech Lecha. Here we are. From Bereshit, Genesis Yudalid, so it's Bereshit Yudalid Yudchet, and that's Genesis 14:18. Okay, and this is when Avram defeats in the whole war of Stone, when Avram defeats the other kings so that he can save Lot. So here we have the Umalki Tzedek Melech Shalem Hotzi Lechem Vayayin V'hu Chohen Le'el Elyon. And Melchizedek, the king of Shalem, took out bread and wine, and he was a priest for, and of course there are two ways of reading this view, traditional, right? You can read it Kel Elyon, or you can read it El Elyon. Is he a priest for the Israelite, what we would consider the Israelite God, where even there are no Israelites yet, right? Is he a priest for that God, or is he the priest of some other God who's called El Elyon? All right. And what do we know about this? Let's say it's an unknown God who's El Elyon. What do we know about him? We know from the continuation, Vayivarchehu Vayomar, and he blessed him and he said, Baruch Avram le'el Elyon. Blessed is Avram to, let's say it's a different God, El Elyon. Okay? Konei Shamayim Va'aretz, who established the earth and heaven. So in other words, this God made the world. Okay? Uvaruch El Elyon asher migen tzarecha biyadecha vayiten lo maaser mikol. Essentially, blessed is El Elyon who allowed you to be victorious against your enemies. Exactly what migen is there. We can talk about it. I mean, that's not completely clear, I think. And he gave him a tenth of everything. All right, and then if we continue on, if we skip, right? So what Avram says, no, I don't have it. Just a second. Now I lost it, excuse me. So Avram says that, and then the king of stone who's there, the king of stone says to him, because they've just won in battle, he says, give me the people. In other words, I'll take the people, either I'll release the captives or I'll take captives as slaves. Take all the booty. Avram says to the king of stone, Harimoti yadi el Hashem I have raised my hand for God, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, he names, right, God, who is this El Elyon, right? In other words, he's saying that Melchizedek, who's like worshiping this God over everything, who created everything, I'm telling you who it is now. I know his name, right? Right? And it's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. That's who it is. Okay, that's who I did this for. Okay, Konei Shamayim Va'aretz, who establishes heaven and earth. He created the world. So I'm just kind of straightening you guys out now. Okay, that God that Melchizedek is serving, that's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. That's YHWH, however you want to say it. That's who it is, right? And then he says, I'm not going to, because I did it for God, I'm not going to take anything. I'm not going to take any booty, nothing. All right. So there's a possible idea here that what he's doing is he's coming. Now, you don't have to say that. You can just say, yeah, everyone's worshiping kind of the same God, and they really are just calling him different names, right? And he doesn't really need to straighten them out so much. But there is absolutely this idea that let's call him, I personally don't like to kind of pronounce the YHWH name. I avoid it. And so let's say that he's the one, Avram is the one who knows his name. And in general, he's kind of saying, yeah, that God you're worshiping, that's my God. That's this one God who created heaven and earth. Okay. But who would El Elyon be if we're reading it that way? Now, the traditional way, of course, is just to say that Melchizedek serves the God that is the Israelite God throughout the Bible, that that's actually who he's serving, and he just doesn't know the name, right? But let's say he's serving someone that he thinks is named El Elyon, who is El. Right? Well, we know about El. We know about him from this area. We know about him from the Ugaritic text. Now, I'm going to say a little bit about the Ugaritic texts. Why are they important? And I know I've talked about them before, but it bears repeating, okay? So I'm going to, let me just pause for a second. Does anyone have any questions? If you have any questions, you can, at this point, you can unmute yourselves and ask, or you can put in a comment in the comment section. And meanwhile, I'm going to call.
I have a question.
Yes. Yes.
Since I'm new, I'd like to know just when can I find out how to get these texts and things?
Oh, you should send me, send me your email address. Okay, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Okay, and take it down. So, because it's going to, after the class is over, you're not going to have access to the chat anymore. Oops, I did it privately. Sorry, just a second.
I have the Adidia list.
Oh, you have the digital list. Okay, yeah. So send me an email on the email that's on that list, and I'll add you to the email group.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so moving right along, I'm going to show you where Ugarit is. Let me share the map. Anyone who received the map has it already, but I think in this case, I will share. Yes. Yes.
Are you asking a question that when Melchizedek speaks to Abraham, we don't know what God he's referring to? Is he's referring to Yud Kei Vav Kei? Is who's this?
We don't know. He's calling He's calling a God El Elyon. Now we're still not going to really know after the Ugaritic text. We know that there's a God named El. He's usually spoiler alert. He's usually not called Elyon. He's called the Bull El. Okay. He's the head of the Ugaritic Pantheon. Okay. So I'll just lay it all out there. Okay. El is the head of the Ugaritic Pantheon. He's got a wife, Ashtera, right? And Ashterot, she has a wife, okay? And the two of them are kind of the patriarch and matriarch of this family of gods. Baal is their kid, so is Yam, so is Mot, and so is Anat, all right? And that's your major pantheon, okay? Baal fights Yam and kills him. Mot fights Baal and kills him. Anat kills Mot and brings back Baal. Okay, so they're all one big happy family. Okay, and that's our pantheon. That's our Canaanite pantheon. Okay, now again, there's a difference between whether you're by the Euphrates, Assyria, whether you're out by Babylonia, or whether you're in Canaan, right, in Canaan, right, because the texts are different, the beliefs are different, and the pantheons are also somewhat different. So that's why the Ugaritic texts are so important. Again, let me share my screen just a second. Let me get the all right, this is what hold on just a moment. And I will call up this. Here we are. Okay. All right. Can I rotate it? Yes. All right. I'm going to share my screen, and we'll take a look at the Ugarit. Strange. Here we are. Okay. All right. So if we look at, this is a map of the ancient Near East. Okay. And if we look on, if we focus in, here's Ugarit. Now, just to understand how far north this is. Okay. Here is Chatzor. We're down here, right? Okay. Even if we go all the way up north in terms of Israel, we're not getting to like Sidon and Tyre, right? Sidon and Sur, okay? And then we go up past Byblos, we go up towards, and then we finally get to Ugarit, modern day Syria, right? It's modern day Syria. But it's Ugarit is how we know about what we call Northwest Semitic, which is essentially the family of languages that are in this area. Okay, so Akkadian, which is what everyone's writing in, is from this area here. All right, it's Southeast Semitic, and it's very, very different if you look at Semitic languages, it's quite different from Hebrew. Ugaritic is very, very, very close to Hebrew, and Ugaritic has an alphabet, which is lovely, a cuneiform alphabet, which makes it easy to read. And it means that we can kind of open it up. We can draw all sorts of parallels. There are a lot of cognates, meaning there are words that are super similar, used in similar ways, that can shed light on words that only appear once in the Bible, for example. And again, it can tell us something about what are the beliefs in this area. Okay. So that's Ugaritic. I'm going to stop sharing now. All right. So Ugaritic was discovered in 1928 by a farmer. I think was plowing his fields. The standard kind of story. The texts are from 14th. The texts in general are from 14th to 13th century BCE. That's the Bronze Age. So when there are kings in Israel, the pre-monarchic and monarchic age in Israel, that's the Iron Age. That's after the Bronze Age. When we think of Avram, we think of Bronze Age, right? That's where we would, place in the biblical history. Okay. Rachi makes the comment that it sounds like Avram and Melchizedek are both worshiping El Elyon. Yeah, it does sound that way. Like I'm bringing these possibilities, but it's particularly for these verses, it's not super clear because again, the Canaanite El is usually not called, as far as we can see, Elyon. He's got other names. He's called Father a lot. It's called Father El, Beneficent El, Bull El is the most common one. So we're in the Bronze Age when we talk about Ugarit. There was a earthquake and fire there, or earthquake or fire there at 1365. So we have text from then. Usually when you're looking in the ancient world and you have texts, okay, usually the reason we still have them is because there was some kind of layer of destruction. All right, and then everything stopped, and the texts are found as in situ, right? So Ugarit went through a disaster in 1365, and then its final destruction was in about 1200. So that's when our texts are from, those two periods, BCE. And we can read them because we have the Ugaritic 5 polyglot. Ugaritic 5 just describes when it was published, right? But they had this list of words in Sumerian, Akkadian, Hurrian, and Ugaritic, all next to each other. Right? And so we're like, oh, now we know the meaning of these Ugaritic words. And not only that, but there were about 130 words where they actually had them, what's the word? They actually had them in, what do you call it when you, like, if I'm writing in Hebrew and I write Baruch and then in English I write Baruch, what do you call it? Transliterated. They have it transliterated, they have Ugaritic transliterated into Akkadian. All right, now we could already read Akkadian when we found this stuff. So as soon as you got Ugaritic transliterated into Akkadian, then you can really read it. You know the sound of it. Not only that, but Ugaritic, like Hebrew, like classic biblical Hebrew, is written without vowel sounds. So how do you vocalize this stuff? How do we even know how to pronounce it? The answer was the places where it's transcribed into Akkadian, because Akkadian, as crazy lettering system as it is, it includes vowels. So we knew a little bit about the vowels from that. And also because Ugaritic, unlike Hebrew, doesn't have an aleph, right? So there's no kind of null, right? Whenever it has an aleph, you have a letter for the vowel sound. You only have vowel letters when there's an aleph. So there are some words with alephs. Whenever they get it, there's a verb with an aleph, everyone gets really excited because you know what vowel sound is there. Okay. That's my little talk about Ugaritic language. So what are we reading tonight? We're reading a little bit of the Baal cycle just to give you kind of an idea of what the beliefs were in this area in the Bronze Age, more or less. Now again, we're making a lot of assumptions because I showed you how far north Ugarit is, right? Now it's very clear that the language at least is very, very close to Hebrew, all right? Not quite as close as if we get to the Mesha stele, that's almost Hebrew, right? But this is very close to Hebrew still. That's for a language that is dated, classically dated to much earlier than biblical Hebrew. and so it's you can kind of understand that they are in fact working on the same pantheon, more or less, with differences. Okay. Yes. Was there a question? So now, okay, so now we're going to kind of dive into the Baal cycle. I just sent you guys excerpts, and that's what we're going to read, just to give us a little taste of what the pantheon was like. Okay, so I'm going to start with the part with the Baal cycle. Now, this part of the Baal cycle, he's Anat. Okay, so Anat is Baal's adolescent sister. They call her the Betulat Anat, and you'll see it. I'm pronouncing it like you would say it in Hebrew, but that's kind of her name. Now, Betula does not mean virgin; it means kind of a young woman who hasn't had a child. Okay, so so she's a young woman, but she is a bloodthirsty young woman, which we will read about later on. She's a warrior. Okay, and she and Baal are, in the Baal cycle especially, they're allies. Anat loves him, and she'll just do just about anything for him, and he in return has relations with a cow so that she can have a bull to ride on. So tit for tat, I guess. So they have this close relationship. And here he's sending her messengers because he needs a palace from El. All the other gods get palaces. He wants a palace from El. He wants her to ask, and he sends messages. This is after he's already defeated Yam. Yam is the sea, right? So here in this excerpt, it says, there Anat perceives the gods, the messengers. On her feet shake, around her loins tremble, above her face sweats. The joints of her loins convulse, weak are the ones of her back. She raises her voice and declares, why have Gapin and Ugar come? These are the messengers. What enemy rises against Baal? What foe against the cloud rider? Cloud rider, Baal is the storm god, and the cloud rider is Rochev Arapoth, right? We have a similar phrase that is used mainly in Psalms and Tehillim for God, right? That he rides the clouds. Surely I fought Yam, the beloved of El. Actually, Baal does this, so I'm not really sure why she's saying she did it, but Yam is called the beloved of El. Yam is the sea. Surely I finished off River, the great god. Surely I bound Tunan and destroyed him. I fought the twisty serpent, the potentate with 7 heads. I fought Desire, the beloved of El. I destroyed Rebel, the calf of El, Egel. If you look on the left, where you can see the Ugaritic and English letters, right? You'll see the Egel, the Ayin, Gimel, and Lamed. The Ayin is the little comma there, the reverse comma. Okay. I fought Fire, the dog of El. I annihilated Flame, the daughter of El, that I might fight for silver and inherit gold. So here you see kind of a bunch of these different monsters / gods that Baal or Anat have destroyed. Now again, this idea that Baal had to fight Yam is also this kind of thing where in biblically, like, it's not a deal, right? God just kind of puts borders on the sea. He's like, here's the sea and here's the land. He puts, the sea's only till here, and it's no biggie, right? These are not gods, all right? And I think it's important to recognize that in the polytheistic system, yes, you have a god, which is Tiamat. You have a god, which is, and Tiamat is actually is not what we would call the Tehom. I talked about this the other time. Tiamat's lover is the Tehom, is what we would call the Tehom, right? But the idea of all of these different natural phenomena, which were considered chaotic and uncontrollable, they were gods, right? And the god who was who Ugarit kind of considered their patron god, Baal, he defeats them. He has to defeat them, all right? So Baal defeated these things. Moving on to the other section, I just wanted to show kind of, we're skipping, right? So everyone's asking El, right, to give Baal a palace, all right? So I'm going from lines 41 to 43. Your decree, O El, is wise. You are wise for eternity. Chochmata im olam, right? So you are wise for eternity. My vocalization is not completely correct here because I'm reading it a little bit too much like Hebrew, and not the correct Ugaritic vocalization always, because it's very easy to forget it, particularly if you haven't done Ugaritic for a while. All right. Our king is mightiest Baal. Now here you have something that looks like Elyon Baal. You have Aliyon Baal, right? It looks like Elyon. It's not Elyon. That A, remember when I said that the aleph, you don't have an aleph, but when you have an aleph, you see the vowel. That's the vowel from an aleph. It's saying mightiest Baal because it's from El Aleph Lamed. Aleph Lamed meaning mighty. So our king is mighty Baal. It's not Elyon there. All right. Our ruler with none above him. So that's a hint, maybe tell you, but not really. And I'm gonna skip a little. In lament, he cries to Bol El, Thar Il, right? Thar, the th is a tough. Tor El. He calls the Bol El his father, right? To El, the king who created him. It actually probably wouldn't be Shor. It would be Shar, Thar, right? Or Tor be Thar, right? Because the Canaanite shift hasn't happened yet. The Canaanite shift is when A becomes O in the Canaanite languages. It happens around 1000 BCE, right? Whenever I do the Canaanite shift for my students, they say, "Oh, do it again." I'm like, "No, you can only see me do the Canaanite shift once." But that's so in general, all the sounds in Ugaritic are still with the A, right? We have those in Aramaic, by the way, because Aramaic is not Canaanite, so it doesn't go through the Canaanite shift. So the Aramaic keeps the long A instead of shifting to O like we do in Hebrew. So anyway, so he's saying Baal has no house like the gods, no court. The dwelling of El is the shelter of his children. The dwelling of a lady Athirat of the sea, Athirat being El's wife, et cetera, et cetera. So he's asking for a palace. I want to note that Baal is not what you would think of as what you would want in a patron god, because Baal in the Baal cycle, which is dated about 1400 to 1350 BCE, if you want to know, Baal in the Baal cycle is not particularly, I mean, he's powerful, but he's really not all powerful. He has to go begging to El for, so he defeats Yam. He has to go begging to El for a palace, and he is devoured by Mot. Okay, that I did not bring you. Mot is death. Baal goes up against him and immediately is terrified, and Mot in fact devours him. All right. Now you are not. It's not that surprising that death would devour someone, because that is death. Death is defined by it devours everyone. Everyone is devoured by death, right? That's kind of the idea of death. I personally think that Baal is devoured by death, not just because he's not that powerful, but because that expresses how inevitable death is, right? In other words, if you're like, yeah, death is inevitable. It's so inevitable that even Baal is devoured by death, okay? How does Baal get out of this? Well, Anat, and this is the next page that I brought you, Anat goes to Mot, and I'll read it, and you get a little bit of a sense of Anat here. She longs for Baal, like the heart of the cow for her calf, like the heart of the ewe for her lamb, so is the heart of Anat for Baal. She grabs Mot by the hem of his garment. She seizes him by the edge of his cloak. She raises her voice and cries, "You, O Mot, give up my brother." And divine Mot answers, "What do you desire, adolescent Anat?" And it says La Betulat Anat. Again, it uses the Betula is translated as adolescent or a young woman. "I was going about hunting in every mountain, in the heart of the earth, in every hill, in the heart of the fields. My appetite was lacking humans, my appetite the multitudes of earth. I was coming to the pleasant land of the outback, to a beautiful field in death's realm. Then I approached mightiest Baal. I took him like a lamb in my mouth, like a kid crushed in the chasm of my throat." Because the ever-hungry death, right? You have this also in Mishlei and Proverbs. Death devours everything. Death is ever hungry. That's the idea. And he's so hungry that he didn't have enough people to eat. He just thinks like, hey, I'll eat Baal. And that works, right? What does Anat do? I'm skipping to 30 and 33. She seizes divine Mot. With a sword, she splits him. With a sieve, she winnows him. With a fire she burns him, with a millstone she grinds him, in a field she sows him, the birds eat his flesh, fowl devour his parts, flesh to flesh cries out, and somehow this brings back Baal. And do we know how? Not quite, not quite. The next piece that I brought you was just really to show you just how bloodthirsty Anat is. It's from earlier on in the Baal cycle. I'm just going to skip to 9 to 11, 9, 7 to 8. She fights the people of the seashore, strikes the populace of the sunrise. Under her like balls are heads, above her like locust hands, like locust heaps of warrior hands. She fixes heads to her back, fastens hands to her belt. She's taking trophies. Knee deep she gleans in warrior blood, neck deep in the gore of soldiers. With a club she drives away captives, with her bowstring the foe. And look, Anat goes to her house. The goddess takes herself to her palace. Unsated with her fighting in the valley, with battling between the two towns, she essentially has a feast, and it looks like she kind of eats the soldiers that she's defeated. It's charming. Okay, so that's kind of our pantheon that we're working with, right? The Canaanite Pantheon. Now, is this really supposed to be? Is that who Melchizedek is? Melchizedek worshiping this El? So that's a big that. You could absolutely say that doesn't sound right to me. This is not the pantheon that he's worshiping. He's worshiping what we would think of as the Israelite God, the one God, the supreme God who created heaven and earth. We don't know because there is an El who is above everyone else in the pantheon, right? Who's the father of everyone, right? And the father of everything. So if we go and even though, and I do want to show you, and I'm getting to the bull and Cheta Egel, the golden calf in a second. A good question. If we look, I did bring you one other text, which was just to kind of show a ridiculous side of El, where in this, I'm not sure if I should, El essentially has a drinking party, okay, and he gets really, really drunk. And he gets so drunk that he is slipping in his own dung and urine. That's what I gave you, which is page 195, lines 20 to 22. It's the last part. And it is actually using the word, excuse me, it's using the word chara for dung. Like it's actually, yeah, it's not just a translation. He's slipping in his own waste, right? And then it's followed up with what seems to be a cure for a hangover. All right. In other words, what's the point of this text? This text is just kind of a way of introducing this is what you do for a hangover, right? This is how we know because he got really drunk and they went and they got him this, right? So when we read a text like that, we're like, wow, did they really see their God this way? I also question that was this actually a satirical text? Is this text a little bit? Is this text like the alphabet of Ben Sira, which is this very satirical and scatological text, which is not meant to be considered part of like the canon, quote unquote. It's just someone having a little bit of fun, right? And I wonder when I read a text like this, was someone having some fun and said, this is a great way to let people know about this hangover remedy, and so I'm going to tell the story. And then people just copied it because like, why not, right? Did they really think this about the head of their pantheon? Because this is both it's demeaning and disgusting, right? But you're talking about if we talk about Baal, worship of Baal, right, which becomes one of the major deals, one of the major problems, certainly for the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, which is closer to Ugaritic, relatively, right? It becomes a big deal. This is kind of the belief in Baal. This is the system that Baal is existing in. Baal has a palace, which, by the way, there's this whole thing about how Baal needs a window in his palace. Why does he need a window in his palace? Can anyone guess? This is a little bit of a stretch. The reason he needs a window in his palace is because Baal's the storm god. That's how the rain's going to get out, right? Baal's got his palace in the sky. He needs a window so that the rain comes out. So that's why there's this whole thing about how he needs a window, and Baal didn't realize it, and the craftsman's like, Baal, you need a window. And he's like, oh yeah, I need a window, right? And so he has a window. But it's interesting because here we have a system where Baal for Ugarit is the patron god, and he's really not all powerful. He needs allies, he needs help, he needs El to give him stuff. There's a theory that's because Ugarit itself was always under an empire, like it was under Egypt, and then it was under the Hittite kingdom, which was a major kingdom in the Bronze Age. It's interesting then, if we talk about Israel and the history of Israel, they were independent actually for long stretches. And yet at a certain point they're constantly dealing with empires, and yet the understanding is, well, our God is the God that created everything, right, and is the only God. And when you read these mythical texts from other cultures that form the background of biblical text, it's even more striking how the sea in the Bible is just the sea. Right? You get a little bit of the hints of these other things in Eov, in Job, and in Tehillim, in Psalms a little bit. This hint that, God subdued the sea, that kind of thing, that feeling of it. But the sea is just the sea in the creation, in our creation story. It's just God, and also, and this is something that I was thinking a little bit about because I was thinking in terms of creation text. It's interesting that if you read like Akkadian creation text, the protagonists are the gods, right? If you read Bereshit, you read the book of Genesis, till what point is God the protagonist? If you stretch it, it's through the flood, right? You say, well, God had to decide to bring the flood, and the God's like, okay, now I'm not going to bring a flood again. And after that, God's not the protagonist anymore. God's a character. But who is this following? It's following people, right? It's following people. The creation myths in the ancient Near East are usually talking about where the gods are from. Well, where people are from too, absolutely. But where the world is from, but where the gods are from. And that's not even a question in the biblical creation account. God just is. I mean, where is he from? That's not the question. A lot of times I think that we can learn a lot about worldviews by seeing the questions people are asking. What do they need the answers for? And the answers that people need, and we see this in Tanakh itself, as we move through the Bible, questions people are asking change. The type of answers that worked before now don't answer the main question anymore. And there are questions that arise that before people didn't even think about, right? I work on origin of sin, right? So that's a question for the Second Temple period. It's not a question in the Hebrew Bible for the most part. Right? Where is sin from? What do you mean, where is sin from? They're people. People are crappy, right? What do you mean, where is sin from, right? That's not the question. There are other questions. That's not the question. Later on, it becomes a question. Okay, I'm going to address some of your questions now. Thor, bull, like Spanish toro. I don't know where toro comes from. I mean, we have shore, tor. Those are words for bull. Can you connect between that and Spanish Torah? I don't know. Maybe. Is there a connection between the bull and Chet Egel? Okay. So about the golden calf, Chet Egel, and the connection with these bulls. So I think that it makes a lot of sense. Remember that the golden calf is introduced by Ele Elohecha Yisrael. These are your gods, or this is your God, O Israel, right? So what does that mean? The character El in Ugaritic texts is associated with a bull. He's called the bull El. Okay, is this a reverse kind of syncretism to what may have been happening with Avram and what we may be supposed to understand from Avram Melchizedek? And remember, I did put a big question mark on that. But is this them saying, "Oh yeah, you guys, we've been worshiping an unseen, unseeable God"? Well, that's really the same as El, who's represented by a bull, right? I've heard another theory, which was just from a museum guide, so I think he heard it from somewhere, but I think it's pushing it. Anat rides a bull, okay? Anat rides a bull. There are other gods also who you'll see depicted on bulls, and the idea that, well, we can't see God, so we're going to do the bull that he rides on to represent him, right? Cute idea. I don't know. The more I read of other mythology, the less likely I think that is. I mean, Anat rides a bull as a standard thing, but I don't know that it would be so understood that you would create a bull that's what God's supposed to ride on. I'm not sure. Okay, so I wanted to kind of just to touch on that. I feel like I must address the questionable pasuk in Ha'azinu. Okay, this is something that people always bring up when they're talking about polytheism and the Hebrew Bible. Okay, and that's why I'm bringing it up. All right, this is the story. All right, what is the story? Okay, let me just give you a heads up. What I'm expecting to talk about today is I'm now going to talk about a little bit about this pasuk in Ha'azinu and how we can understand it. It's Dvarim Lamed Bet Ched, Deuteronomy 32:8-9 actually, because there's a lot that's been there's it's an issue. It's an issue, okay? And then I want to talk a little bit about Yiftach and how Yiftach deals with polytheism, and what that, is that meant to be problematic or is it meant to be good diplomacy? Okay, and that's how I'm going to get to the Mesha dealing. So hopefully I do have an eye on the clock, so we'll see what we get to. Yes, a bull appears in Maaseh Merkavah. Maaseh Merkavah, which is the Yechezkel, right? When Yechezkel describes the divine chariot, he actually is drawing a lot from imagery that would have been familiar to people in Babylonia. They've actually found Babylonian imagery that it's not exactly the same as Yechezkel, what Yechezkel is describing, obviously, but Yechezkel is describing something that, first of all, that you can draw, as opposed to the divine presence, whatever, as it's described in Yeshayahu and Isaiah, where you really could not, it's very kind of vague. You could draw what Yechezkel is describing. You could sit down and draw it. My mother was in a woodworking course where there was someone in the class with her who wanted to actually make a wood carving out of what Yechezkel described, and his wife convinced him not to. She's like, I don't think that's such a great idea. But you could, you really could draw just based on what he's saying. And there are certain elements of it which you can find in Babylonian imagery. There are certain things you could talk about what he's doing there. And of course, one of the things with, one of the things Yechezkel does is concretization of things. In other words, he's like, I will show you, okay? You want to see years of exile? I'm going to lie on my side. Now, obviously, this is all, this is a command to him, etc. He creates a little siege. Like, he does things so people can see it with their eyes, and now they're going to believe it. Apparently it works, because unlike Yirmiyahu, who people never believe, and people never go to, sometimes they say, tell us what to do, and then they do the opposite thing every single time, right? But Yechezkel is someone who's really respected. People come to him, and they wait to hear the word of God from him, and then he insults them, and they keep coming, apparently. People are listening to Yechezkel, and so apparently this approach really works at that period, where describing things in a very concrete way and doing things in a concrete way. The very exact kind of description of the divine chariot in a way that you can actually imagine it helps kind of concretize what he describes then, which is the divine presence leaving the temple, which is what that whole thing is building up to. So that, he then says, and then I saw it leave. Guys, Elvis has left the building, and now the temple can be destroyed because the divine presence isn't there anymore, right? And that very precise description helps make that, apparently for his audience, much more believable. Oh wow, we can really see it. Oh my God, the divine presence has left the Beit Mikdash. Okay, back to our topic. Okay, so in Dvarim Lamed Bet Chet, that's Deuteronomy 32:8. Okay, we have this verse. V'hanchel elyon goyim, when the elyon, the supreme, gave portions to the nations. Ba'afrido b'nei Adam, when he separated people out. Yatsev gvulot amim mispar b'nei Israel. He set the borders of the peoples according to the number of the children of Israel. Ki chelek Hashem amo, because the portion of Hashem, of God, is his people. Yaakov chevel nachlato. Right. This is the Yaakov is his portion. Okay. So all right. We always have this question, what does that mean according to the number of Israel? We said, well, the portions of the land are according to the people of Israel, or it's 70 nations, 70 people, people of Israel went to, these are like their answers, right? So they're explanations. Now, there are, of course, different versions of the biblical text. This is the Masoretic text, all right, because it came down, it was kind of got the seal of approval from the Masoretes. In the Byzantine period in Israel, it's like 600, say around, okay, after CE. Right? But we have two other versions. Okay, we had the Septuagint version. The Septuagint version says, according to the number of the angels, right? So they're like, what does that mean? What could that have been? Okay, what could angels have been translating? All right, so for people who weren't Jews, they said, it's translating Bnei El, right? It's translating, and then what it really meant, scholars said, okay, was when the head of the Pantheon gave out nations, he set them out, he gave borders according to the number of the gods, of his lower gods, and then he gave Israel to Yud-Kei-Vav-Kei, to YHWH, he got Israel, right? All right, so now at Qumran, we actually found a version in Hebrew that says not Bnei El, but Bnei Elohim, which makes a lot more sense that the Septuagint would translate as angels, because Bnei Elohim can easily be translated as angels, right? So what does that mean? But that doesn't give us an out, because Bnei Elohim can also be understood as members of the divine class, all right? My teacher, Mark Smith, who actually, by the way, translated the Baal cycle in the Ugaritic text I sent you, he said, look, the fact that, now, this is something also about biblical poetry. It's not true of all biblical poetry, but most biblical poetry actually reflects an older Hebrew, right, than the prose of the Hebrew Bible. It reflects an older Hebrew, and it seems to reflect older ideas, okay? And something that Mark Smith pointed out was, he said, look, the fact that this idea is being reflected and not taken out of the Hebrew Bible means that it's already lost its polytheistic force. In other words, no one's thinking of it in a polytheistic way anymore. Because if they were, they would have edited it. They would have taken it out much, much earlier. That at the point that you have this poem, which is in the biblical text, is so far from the polytheistic idea that no one was like, you just left it in because no one's thinking that way, all right? Everyone's already thinking in terms of Elyon. Who is Elyon? The Israelite God, right? So whether there was some story back then that the head of the Pantheon split up the portions to lower gods, that's just, now it's a poetic, it's pretty and it's poetic, right? And it's not, doesn't have the force of a polytheistic idea anymore, okay? Now I do want to say, I want to address a ridiculous idea now, okay? I want to address something that was done by a certain biblical scholar who now is sitting in jail for other reasons, not because of this interpretation, all right? This biblical scholar, he was a tremendously prominent biblical scholar, that when he is sitting in jail for a very good reason, and if you followed biblical scholar Twitter, you would know who I'm talking about. So anyway, and I'll tell you, I normally when I quote someone, I quote him by name. And in this case, I feel like I can't quote him without saying what he did. And like, I can't say his name without saying, you know, and just look at the first line of Wikipedia about him, you know, which says what he did. Yeah, someone just guessed it, right? And so I'm not saying his name. So I'm not saying his name because I don't think it would do him any favors. But anyway, this guy said, he said he apparently decided to say that Lemispar B'nai Shor El, right? He actually changed it to the children of Bull El. That is ridiculous. No way, okay? Because to say that that would work, again, this is the Yisrael is the Masoretic text, okay? Nowhere, in no version, do we have something that says it's Bull El here, you know, here. Nowhere, okay? And so it wouldn't work. They wouldn't change it to B'nai Elohim. There's no reason anyone would keep sons of Shor El in the middle of the Hebrew Bible. It wouldn't happen, okay? I'm just bringing this up because sometimes people come like, oh, I read this and that makes so much sense. And I'm saying like, no. Okay, so I'm bringing up this idea. This is someone, and you understand why he wanted to do it. He wanted to do it because you've got this Bull El head of a pantheon, right? And he wants to bring it in and stuff it into the verse, okay? It doesn't, in this case, it really doesn't make sense because there's no reason that it would have been preserved with the name Shor El, and it's also far too polytheistic to be in this text. That's just like saying, okay, we don't even believe in God anymore. Like that would be a bridge too far, okay, is what I'm saying. All right, I'm going to take a break for questions, and I'm going to do, I know you guys don't want to go very far over an hour. All right, I'm still collecting votes, by the way. Anyone who has a vote on an hour and a half, etc., I'm still collecting votes if you haven't voted. But for now, I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet. And I am going to have a conclusion to bring stuff together. And I'm going to read people's comments. Which segment exactly of the pasuk are you translating as angels or sons of Elohim? Okay, I'm going to say this again. So B'nai Yisrael. The big question is B'nai Yisrael, sons of Israel. What is that? Is that original or not? Okay. So in the Masoretic text we have B'nai Yisrael. In the Septuagint, it seems to be translating angels. So they used to say it's translating B'nai El. There is no Hebrew witness to B'nai El. All right, we have a Hebrew witness to B'nai Elohim, which actually translates very nicely to angels. All right, in Qumran, Deuteronomy J. Right, that's it's one of the manuscripts of Deuteronomy has this verse, and it's B'nai Elohim. Okay, B'nai Elohim does not work with the meter as nicely as B'nai El does, but it does translate pretty nicely to angels. Right, because that is how one would expect the Septuagint to translate it. And that's what the whole story was. Now, I have to say that a lot of what people were building on was not B'nai Elohim, it was on B'nai El. They assumed that Septuagint was translating B'nai El, and so they're like, oh, children of El, that head of the pantheon, right? And that they got, the portions were divided according to that. Okay, that's what we're talking about. Maybe other prisoners can get some good Bible lessons. If he's up to it, I don't know. I would be kind of depressed. I'm not sure. I wonder. I always wonder what it feels like for people who are really prominent scholars and also religious people, a prominent religious person who ends up like that in a French jail. If you drop the yud and read sin resh as shin resh equals bull. Right. So his idea was that how do they get to B'nai Yisrael? How do they get to B'nai Yisrael? They must have emended it from B'nai Shor El. B'nai Bull, the sons of Bull El, and they changed it. They changed it, or in transmission, they didn't know what Shor El was. They changed it to Yisrael. That doesn't make sense. You wouldn't have it. You wouldn't have that be preserved long enough to get a late B'nai Yisrael and also B'nai Elohim where they're completely ignoring it and they're completely changing it. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. How far back in history does the pantheon belief go? Did it originate in Mesopotamia before Canaan? There are a lot of pantheons, and the what we're reading in the Ugaritic text again is like if we need to put it in our biblical timeline, you're talking like Avram, right? So we don't really need to go earlier if we're talking about the biblical text. Were there pantheon beliefs? Yeah, sure. And I'm less familiar. I think the El Pantheon is specific to the Canaanite region. But if you showed me something from Acadia, I'd be like, oh, okay. You know, here you have kind of Baal fitting into this pantheon with El at the head, and that seems to be more of a Canaanite thing. Canaanite and this area. Okay, any questions? I'm going to go to Yiftach now. All right, so we turn to Yiftach, and Yiftach also has to deal with this issue. What?
So El Shaddai is an old name of God. Does
Right.
that have any, comparison to the Ugaritic or to another language any place?
That's a really good question. I remember once I looked into this, and I think they weren't sure, but I'll look into it again, right? What I remember was that there wasn't a real conclusive conclusion regarding specifically Shem Daled Yud, specifically the Shaddai part. But I'll look into it again. I'll make myself a note. Okay. Okay. So if we,
I just have one little question.
Sure.
About something that I didn't understand in the Tanakh itself about the name of God. That in the beginning of Lech Lecha, what you quoted, the revelation is from Yud Kei Vav Kei, but then afterwards in Va'era, it says that Hashem didn't reveal the Yud Kei Vav Kei to the Avot and only used Shaddai.
Yeah, yeah. Everyone has that question, right? It's a real problem. It's a real problem. And I, it's, the exegetical explanation is like, because God didn't actually fulfill his promises, but it's a question. I can't, to say that I have a solution. Not only that, but you see, if I was just talking about Hagar in the beginning of the class, Hagar doesn't know the name of God. And it becomes very clear when because she names God, right? She has her own name for him. And it sounds like she doesn't know, seems pretty clear like she doesn't know the name of God. So she needs to create a name. Like this is what she called him, right? Not just you can say, well, she's naming the angel, right? Because he does say, God, you came up here and said blah blah blah, but she doesn't seem to know the name. And then that's a contrast between her and let's say Afra. But it's I don't have an answer to that. It's just one of these questions. Like, how can you say that when they're using the name of God like left and right? It seems like. Okay. All right. So Yiftach. Now Yiftach is an interesting guy because he's problematic. He's problematic in numerous ways, which we won't go into. But he does a bunch of problematic things, not just one. He's presented, he's introduced as the son of a prostitute, which is already and where he's not in good relations with his family, and so it's so he's a problematic character. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the theory of how the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges, is put together. The idea that that at the end you're meant to see a deterioration of both Judges and the period because there's no king, right? So Yiftach is the beginning of the problematic Judges. You go from Yiftach, who has a civil war, who leads a civil war, who makes a stupid oath that dooms his daughter. He's a problem, right? Then we get Shimshon, who's not even really a judge, okay? And what he does is kind of violent. He's super problematic, right? He uses his strength to kind of get out of a situation where he's in a brothel and he's trapped, and so he's in certain ways heroic and in certain ways really not. okay? And then we go from that to the story of Micha and the Danites, right? Where you have this fake temple, and the Danites kind of people from Dan kind of take over, and it's kind of anarchy. And then we finish with the Pelegus by concubine of Gibeah, where everything is just horrible, right? And that's when there's no king. Okay, so Yiftach is the start of the problematic judges. So whenever Yiftach does something, we don't know, is this the right thing to do, or is this not the right thing to do? So I'm reading here from Shoftim, from Judges, Yud Aleph Chaf Daled 11:24. What's going on? He is in an argument with the with Ammon, right? They say, we want this area. This is our area. You took it when you came up from Egypt. What's the history of this area? According to the Torah, right, in the biblical account, is Israel allowed to conquer Ammon and Moab? Anyone remember? Is Israel allowed to conquer Ammon and Moab?
I think no.
No, right. Thank you. No, they are not. They are not allowed. They're specifically told you can't conquer Ammon and Moab. You're related. You can't conquer them. So how does Israel end up with what everyone calls Arvoth Moab? Everyone knows this was traditionally Moab land. How is Israel there, right? And the answer is, you get it in Bamidbar, you get it in the book of Numbers, right? That the Amori conquer it first. And then the Amori says you can't pass, and then Israel fights with the Amori, and that's how they get that land. Okay? That's how Israel's sitting on Arvoth Moab, right? That's how Israel gets the land. And so Ammon, which is Ammon and Moab are kind of together, Ammon is saying to him, you guys conquered us, and that was really not fair. And Yiftach says no, and he says the whole story. He's like the Amori conquered it from you, and then we conquered it from them, and that's the way it works. Okay. And he says, and he explains. Okay, I'm reading from again Yud Aleph Chaf Daled, which is 11:24. Halo et asher yorishcha kamosh Elohecha hatot yirash. Whatever kamosh, your God, gives you to inherit, you should inherit. But kol asher harish Hashem Eloheinu mipanenu oton yirash. And whatever YHWH, our God gives us, right? We get. That's the way it works. And he says, are you any better than Balak, the son of Zippor? Look what happened to him. You're not gonna win. Okay? And they go to war. So what is his arguments? The question is he being problematic because it's Yiftach, right? So is he being problematic in acknowledging Kamosh, or is this smart diplomatically? Okay. Frankly, it reads like being diplomatically smart because he gives the whole story that we always know. He's like, no, we didn't do it. It was the Amori, and hey, it's what our God gives us. It's what your God gives you, and this is the way it works. This is the way it works. Now, he doesn't have to believe in Kamosh to say this. He's making a diplomatic argument, right? This is how you conquer. This is how we conquer. You got your stuff. You got our stuff. Kamosh gives you your stuff, and our God gives us our stuff. Okay. Now we can actually see, and I will end with this. I brought it because it's so darn cool, right? So if you look at the Mesha Stele, now the Mesha Stele is really cool because I will give you the dates, which I always write down. Okay, it's 840 BCE. So the stuff that we were talking about earlier was way before. Now again, I always like to say, because people are like, how can you say something's before the Bible or whatever? It is because if you say, okay, traditionally, right? So you say Torah was given at Sinai. Sinai is much, much later than any of the texts we've read so far today. Much later, much, much later, okay? So I always say when it comes to the Torah, it comes to Tanakh. I say I've read stuff before and I've read stuff after, and there's nothing like Tanakh. I love Tanakh. I read the ancient Near Eastern stuff and I read the Second Temple stuff. Ancient Near Eastern stuff is, excuse me, it's not politically correct to say this, but it's kind of primitive. And the Second Temple stuff is truly derivative. There's nothing like Tanakh. Anyway, so let's go to the Mesha Stele. I never know how to quite pronounce it. And if you look, I sent you the translation, but I also sent you the Hebrew. And I have to say, I mean, that's the Hebrew. It is actually Hebrew. You can open it up and read it. If you look at, I sent you also, oops, bookmark. I sent you also the photograph and the kind of transcription, and you can see it's written in kind of Paleo Hebrew letters. All right, so if you can read Paleo Hebrew, you can read this pretty much. And it's written, of course, without nikud, without any vowels. So I am going to cheat a little bit and read a little bit from the vocalized thing. I'm reading from Haktav HaMichtav Shmo Achituv. It's all the inscriptions in Hebrew and Aramaic. So it's a lot of fun just to look at. Inscriptions, letters, Lachish letters are in here. It's a lot of fun. So here it says, and he's going to talk, and he talks about his fight, right? His fight with this is now we're talking about Moab, not Ammon, but like I said, Ammon and Moab go together. And his fight, which he's explaining in terms of Chemosh, right? His God is Chemosh, and he says, Anochi Mesha ben Chemoshiat Melech Moab Hadivoni. So I am Mesha, the son of Chemoshiat, the king of Moab. Avi Malach Moab 30 Shat, Vanochi Malachti Achar Avi. So my father ruled Moab for 30 years, and I ruled after my father. Va'as habama hazot lichmosh, va'kircho bamat yesha. And I have made this high point of worship, right, for Chemosh in Kircho, which may mean a mitzvah, a battlement, a fortress. And it's either a kind of a temple of like salvation, or that could be the name, Bamat Yesha. Kioshiani mikol melchim, because he saved me from all the kings. And he showed me the defeat of my enemies. Omri Melch Yisrael, Omri, the king of Israel. We all remember Omri, right? V'yanevet Moab yamin rabin. He tormented Moab many days. Ki ye'enaf Chemosh be'artzo, because Chemosh was angry at his land, right? Chemosh was angry at us. That's how Omri managed to conquer us and make our lives miserable, right? Vayachlifo beno, and Omri's son, namely Achav, took over from him. Vayomer gam hu anevet Moab, and he also said, "I will torment Moab." Okay, b'yamai amar kain, in my days he said so. All right, v'erev bo ubeveto, and I saw the defeat of him and his house. V'Yisrael avod avad olam, and Yisrael has been destroyed, has been lost forever. Now we know, of course, this is absolutely not true, and this reminds us that you don't just take an inscription literally. We do this a lot. We're like, well, you know, our text says this, but we have an inscription that says this other thing. Oh, well, Dina, I'll put my the recording up so you can see the rest. We're almost finished. So when you see an inscription that says one thing, right, and you have a text that says something else, the inscription is not necessarily true. And what's interesting is anyone who read this inscription would know it wasn't true. Okay, Israel was a kingdom when this is being written. All right, it is a fairly flourishing kingdom when this is being written. So everyone who reads this knows that it's not true. All right, but hey, you know, you're dedicating this to Chemosh, and you're gonna, like, you know, he's destroyed forever, and you mean that he's never gonna come back from this kind of defeat, you know, even though it's not really true, right? And I wanted to skip down to a couple more interesting things. And I also like the idea that why he explains the Chemosh was angry at his land. That's how we were defeated, right? Which is very familiar to us from the way we talk about God in general. And he also notes, if you look at here, I'll just continue on actually. Ve'even et balamon ma'on va'asba shuach. So I skipped. Vayirish Omri et kol eretz mehidva vayeshev bayamehu v'chetzi yemei beno arba'in shat. Right. So Omri he conquered the whole land of Mehidva, right? And his son he continued his conquering there for 40 years. But Yeshiva Chemosh b'yamai. But in my days, Chemosh essentially returned it to Moab. Ve'even et Baal Ma'on va'asba hashuach. I built a Baal Ma'on and I made a reservoir there. Ve'even et Kiriaten ve'ish Gad yashav be'eretz atarot me'olam. And the people of Gad had lived in the land of Atarot from beforehand, right? Vayiven lo melech Yisrael et Atarot ve'eltachem bakir bo chazeha ve'arog et kol ha'am. And so first of all, he knows the tribe of Gad, right? And it's important to him to note Gad was there. That's who the tribe was. And the king of Israel built Atarot, ve'eltachem bakir bo chazeha, and I fought here and I held it and I killed all the people. Okay. El Tachem. So a couple. I'm just going to read a couple more notes. Approximate year of the stele is 840 BCE. That's the year. El Tachem means I fought. Note that here fighting is in hitpael. It's in the reflexive. In Hebrew, fighting is what? In the
hitpael.
It's in nifal. Nilcham. So here it's in the hitpael. That's what you meant. Here's in the hitpael. But in Hebrew, it's in the nifal. We're reading Moabite now, right? We're not actually reading Hebrew. We're reading Moabite. In Hebrew, it's nifal. It's a passive. I've always wondered, why is it in the passive? And here, it's in the reflexive, which is what you would expect. You fight with each other, right? So it's a reflexive verb. In Hebrew, it's passive. You fight because it was kind of forced on you, which I always think is very interesting. Just one more note. I wanted to, let me just find them. We're going to bring this back up when we discuss warfare and morality, warfare and kind of the morality of war in the Torah and in the ancient Near Eastern texts. Like what was okay to do during battle, right? And is that okay, right? So here, if you look at line 16, okay, he's talking about he fought a whole day. Ve'arog kulam, and I killed everyone. Shiv'at alafin gvarin v'gurin, 7,000 men and children, gurin like little cubs, children, ugvarot and women, v'gurot u'rechamot, and girls and virgins. Kilas, rechamot. Remember racham rachamatayim, like the womb, 2 wombs. He's busy killing or remember that that's with Sisera, right? That they're comforting his mother. Don't worry, he's just busy out at war raping women. Like that's why he's late, right? and that's what we see here. Rechamot, wombs, and here what they mean is apparently unattached women, and he just killed all of them. Because I made the city Cherem for Ashtar Chemosh. He's combining, it's a combination god of Ashtar, the apparently the wife of Chemosh, the woman, the female, and Chemosh the male, Ashtar Chemosh. So I made this city Cherem and I killed everyone, little boys, little girls, doesn't matter, and they're all dead. Okay, so. This is a glimpse, first of all, of battle, and second of all, how other nations are actually talking about their gods. In other words, they're saying, yes, the God was angry at the land. That's how they conquered us. Now the God's helping me, and I am killing them. And this town, I killed everyone because I made it cherem for my God, right? Recognize that these people are assets. right? They're of, you don't have to be moral to want to have slaves, right? And he instead killed all of them, including the little kids, including the unattached women that they could also have been used for other purposes. He killed all of them because it's for Kamosh, right? So this is how, in fact, people are talking about their gods, and it helps us understand why Yiftach would make this argument. This is, in fact, how they talk about Kamosh. They talk about, now he's angry at us, now he helped us. He's like, hey, did Kamosh give you this land? No, our God gave us this land. Forget it, right? So this is a recognition of, this is how people are talking about their gods. And also, I do want to point out, once again, that this inscription is not true, right? I mean, I'm not talking about the cities now, but I'm talking about the list of cities, but it is not true that he has destroyed Israel. It simply isn't true. It's not true that he's destroyed Achav either. Okay, so this is presenting a situation which anyone reading it would know this is not true, right? Anyone reading it would know, well, there is a kingdom of Israel. Like, it's there. It's taking up space, right? So that's also helps us keep in mind what it meant to make these declarations in the ancient Near East. Okay, so I've hit on a bunch of I'm sorry for going over. I hit on a bunch of different types of texts, okay? And what we saw today was, first of all, that you can understand biblical texts in terms of a monotheistic, and I really do think there's people like, no, is it monotheistic? Yes, okay? This is a monotheistic text with people who believe in monotheism, right? Believe that there's one God who created heaven and earth. There's no talking about other gods in the way that we saw in, for example, the Baal cycle. There's no basic anthropomorphism like there is, of course, in when you talk about, God, conquering blah 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 in the Psalms. God conquers the depths, things like that. But no real personification in the creation story, no personification going forward of all these different forces of nature, right? We have our people in the stories dealing with a polytheistic world. In other words, they're living in a world, right, where there are other nations worshiping other gods, right? Are they going as far as Micha and Treasar and, of the 12 prophets, right? Micha, when he says, in the future, everyone's going to go according to their God and we're going to go according to Hashem, right? So, but what does that even mean? I wonder if when he says that verse, he's actually not talking about the Messianic age. He's saying, look, God is ours. All the other nations go according to their God. Our God, who's the real God, is ours, right? But there's a recognition that other people believe in other gods, and there are different ways of dealing with it. From Avram, who possibly is saying, yes, you believe in this God who created heaven and earth. That's my God. That's the God, right? To a Yiftach who knows he's dealing in a polytheistic system and says, okay, you've got your God. Did your God give you this land? No, my God gave us this land. And so, recognize the truth of this, right? And to possibly reflections of kind of stories and ideas that a God, that our people belong, this people belongs to this God, which is not necessarily, is perhaps taken so far from kind of these stories that it's no longer really polytheistic. And okay, I'm just going to take a question. Why would the Stele claim that things happen when everyone knows they didn't? First of all, I think the idea is to kind of blow up your victory, like to exaggerate your victory. Now, again, you could say he meant they're no more, meaning they're never going to get back from this defeat. But it's clearly what they call the Shon Kuzma, right? It's clearly exaggerated language. It's the exaggerated language of an inscription. Like if I said, you know what? I gave a class. It was so great. Everyone was just like dumbfounded. Right now, and people are like, no, there's no way. It's not true. You taught a class. People. There are people from you. There are people were not dumbfounded. It's not going to happen. But they let me say it, right? They know what I. So it's that sort of thing. You're a king. You're talking about your God helping you. You're going to talk about this tremendous victory, right? And you'll exaggerate it, and no one's going to call you on it. They'll be like, yeah, there's no more Israel. It's like I don't know, someone wins. I'm not a big sports person, but you're like, we finished them, we destroyed them, right? And you're like, yeah, but I just saw the Knicks got ready for another game. Like, no, that's not what he meant, right? He didn't mean that all the Knicks are dead. He meant he destroyed them in the game. So it's that sort of, it could be that sort of thing. Everyone knows it's an exaggeration.
Maybe he wrote it on a tablet, because so in the future people will believe him.
You know what? You could say sure, because the point is, I actually like Rechi. I do think that's absolutely a possibility, because this is for the generations, and I think that's a good point. I like, maybe you meant it jokingly, but I think it's seriously a good point. Yeah. It absolutely, because when you put up a monument like this, it's meant for the generations. So yes, it absolutely could be. You know, people will look at this and they'll be like, "That's the guy who destroyed them." You know, sure, yeah, that absolutely could be. So, isn't there some Egyptian inscription about the eradication of Israel? Yes, there is. We will get to it. Yeah, that one actually is that creates all sorts of problems with the timeline, because when they're saying Israel's destroyed, it's in our timeline before Israel exists. In other words, it creates all sorts of problems with our timeline. We'll talk about it later when we talk about the Exodus. So I hope everyone enjoyed this. I know we skipped around a lot. But I hope that it was interesting and a little eye-opening for you, and also we're going to continue the conversation with looking at different things where the ancient Near Eastern context can shed light on the biblical account. So thank you, Rechi. So thanks everyone. Have a good night.